In the heart of Kumasi, Ghana, the warm air carried both grief and hope as siblings Abani and Kwame stood before their late father's land, acres of rich, red soil and an old farmhouse that had sheltered generations. Their father had worked that land with pride, planting cocoa trees, maize and memories. Now it was theirs. But what should have been a blessing began to feel like a test. Developers had started building a new highway nearby, and suddenly the land's value skyrocketed. Everyone in town talked about it, millions of cedis worth of property sitting right under Abani and Kwame's names. Kwame's eyes shone with ambition, maybe even greed. "This kind of land must be handled by the eldest son," he said one afternoon, his tone firm, almost commanding. Abani looked at him, hurt. "Papa said we'd share everything equally," she reminded him softly. Their father had raised them to stand side by side, not one above the other. But Kwame had already changed. He began talking about business deals and investors, using big words Abani didn't understand. At night, Abani sat on the farmhouse porch, watching the sunset over the fields her father once tilled with bare hands. She felt the earth under her feet, steady, honest, and full of his spirit. But in her heart, a quiet fear grew. Something about Kwame's smile didn't feel like family anymore. It felt like the beginning of betrayal. Days turned into weeks after their father's funeral, and Abani tried to find peace in keeping the farmhouse clean and tending to the garden he'd loved so much. But Kwame started visiting more often, wearing new shirts and carrying his tablet everywhere. He talked a lot about business matters and land documents, saying the government needed updated papers for tax purposes because of the new highway project. Abani didn't fully understand all that, but she trusted her brother, or at least she wanted to. One morning, he showed up with a brown envelope and a practiced smile. "Abani, we need to sign these forms so the land stays in our name." "It's just for taxes," he said smoothly, spreading the papers across the wooden dining table. The house still smelled of their father's pipe tobacco, a scent that made Abani's chest tighten. She hesitated, tracing her finger along the edge of one document. "Kwame, maybe we should let Mr. Tomba check these first. Papa always trusted him with land issues," she said quietly. Kwame's smile faded. His voice turned sharp. "Why are you always doubting me? Don't you trust your own brother?" The words hit her like a slap. She looked at him, confused and hurt. "It's not that I don't trust you, Kwame. I just—" He cut her off, pretending to be offended. "You think I'd cheat my own sister? You think I'm that kind of man?" He pushed the pen toward her. "Just sign it, Abani. We're wasting time." Her hands trembled slightly. She didn't want to argue. She didn't want to disrespect him. After all, he was her big brother, the one who used to walk her to school and buy her sweetbread on Fridays. So she took the pen, swallowed her doubts, and signed where he pointed. Kwame exhaled, a satisfied smirk flickering across his face. "Good," he said, collecting the papers quickly before she could look again. "You did the right thing." He patted her shoulder, then left, his car kicking up red dust as it sped down the road. Abani stood in the doorway, watching him disappear. Something inside her felt uneasy. She couldn't shake the thought that maybe, just maybe, her father would have told her to read first, to ask questions. But it was too late now. She had already signed. That night, she sat by the window, the moonlight spilling across the table where the papers had been. She whispered to herself, "It's just taxes, right?" Her voice wavered with uncertainty. She didn't know it yet, but with that one shaky signature, she hadn't just trusted her brother. She had unknowingly handed him everything their father had built. The sun was already high when Abani decided to visit her father's land again. It had been weeks since she'd last gone there. She'd been too busy trying to settle paperwork and manage the little market stall. She started to stay busy. As she walked down the familiar dirt road, her heart felt lighter. The smell of cocoa and red earth always reminded her of her father. She smiled faintly, thinking of how he used to say, "As long as this land breathes, our family will never go hungry." But when she reached the edge of the farm, her steps froze. The air smelled different, sharp and dusty. The old farmhouse was half gone, walls torn apart, roof pieces scattered across the ground. Huge machines stood where her father's mango trees once were, and men in orange vests were swinging hammers and shouting orders. Ebony ran forward, waving her hands. "Stop! Stop this! What are you doing?" she cried. One of the workers turned and frowned. "Madam, you can't be here. This land belongs to the developer now." Her stomach dropped. "What developer? This is my father's land." The man sighed, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Your brother, Mr. Kwame, sold everything 2 weeks ago. We have the permit. You can ask him yourself." The world around her blurred. The wind roared in her ears. She staggered back, staring at the ground that had held her childhood, now broken, destroyed, erased. "No, he wouldn't," she whispered. But deep down, a cold truth began to settle. Without thinking, she turned and ran, her slippers slipping in the red dust as she raced home. Her breath came in sharp gasps. She pushed open the gate, and the sound that greeted her made her freeze again. Laughter. Loud, careless laughter. Kwame sat in the living room with 2 men in suits, glasses of champagne raised high. "To new beginnings," he cheered. On the table in front of him lay a crisp stack of documents, and right on top, the property deed. Her name was there, next to her signature. Ebony stepped closer, her voice trembling. You sold it. Without telling me." Kwame turned, his grin fading just a little. "Ebony, don't start this now. It was a business decision. You wouldn't understand." She pointed at the paper, tears filling her eyes. "You used my signature. You said it was for taxes." He leaned back, completely unbothered. "And you signed it, didn't you? That makes it legal." Her heart shattered. The farmhouse that once echoed with their father's laughter was gone. The man she called her brother was now a stranger, smiling at her pain. As she stood there, the sound of his laughter mixed with the memory of her father's voice. And for the first time, Ebony realized the truth. Kwame hadn't just sold the land, he had sold their father's dream. Ebony couldn't stop shaking. After the workers left and the dust settled, she walked through what used to be her father's farmhouse. The door was gone, the windows shattered, and the mango tree where he used to sit every evening had been cut down. Only pieces of broken wood and scattered tools remained. She picked up her father's old hat, the one he used to wear when tending to the crops, now covered in dirt. That was the moment she broke. She sank to the ground, clutching it to her chest, sobbing until her voice gave out. The house that once held laughter and love was now nothing but rubble. Later that evening, Ebony confronted Kwame again. He was in the yard, talking on his phone, sounding proud of himself. She stood there silently until he hung up. Her voice was hoarse but steady. "You destroyed everything, Kwame. Papa's house, the land, all gone. For what? Money." Kwame turned to her, his face unreadable. "You're too soft for business, Ebony. This is the real world. Emotions don't build success. Deals do." His words hit her like cold rain. She stared at him, searching for the brother she once loved, the one who used to protect her from bullies and fix her bicycle when it broke. But that man was gone. All that remained was greed wearing her brother's face. Ebony wiped her tears and stood straighter. "Maybe I am soft," she said quietly. "But I'm not stupid. And I'm not done." She turned away, ignoring his mocking laugh. That night she couldn't sleep. The walls felt too heavy with silence. Every memory, her father's laughter, the smell of roasted plantains, the sound of rain on the farmhouse roof, came back, breaking her heart all over again. But underneath her pain, something else began to rise. Determination. At dawn, she opened the small metal box her father had left in her closet. Inside were old papers, his will, and a faded business card. Mr. Tomba, attorney at law. She remembered his kind face and the promise he'd made at her father's funeral. "If you ever need help, my door is open." Ebony took a deep breath, grabbed her phone, and dialed the number. Her hands trembled, but her voice was steady. "Mr. Tomba. It's Ebony Mensah. I need your help." There was a pause on the other end, then a calm, firm voice replied. "Ebony, I've been expecting this call." For the first time in weeks, a flicker of hope warmed her chest. She looked out at the broken land through the window, her father's hat still on the table. She whispered softly, Papa, I'll make this right. And deep inside she knew, this fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. When Abony met with Mr. Tomba, she was nervous but hopeful. The old lawyer still had the same calm eyes and steady voice she remembered from her childhood. He listened carefully as she explained everything, the fake tax papers, the sudden sale, and how Kwame had used her signature to take everything. When she finished, her hands were shaking. Mr. Tomba leaned back in his chair and said quietly, "Abony, what your brother did is not only betrayal. It's a crime." Those words gave her strength. For the first time someone believed her. They began digging into the truth together. Mr. Tomba visited the Land Commission office in Kumasi, using his connections to access the records. What he found made his face darken with anger. The documents had been changed. The land registry showed Kwame as the sole owner, and the transaction had been approved by a government officer who was known for taking bribes. Even the date of the deed transfer had been altered. Meanwhile, Abony started doing her own quiet investigation. She visited the construction site again, pretending to be curious about the work. She took photos of the bulldozers, the workers, and the company logos. She spoke to a few of them kindly, offering them water and small snacks. Slowly they began to open up. One worker told her, "Your brother said the woman who used to live here agreed to everything. We didn't know it was you." Another even gave her a copy of the contractor's payment receipt with Kwame's name on it. At home, Abony kept all her findings neatly in a folder: photos, receipts, notes, and voice recordings. Each piece of evidence was like a brick in the wall she was building against Kwame. There were nights she wanted to break down again, but she reminded herself of her father's voice. "When the storm comes, stand tall like the cocoa tree." Mr. Tomba returned after 2 weeks of investigation, holding a thick envelope. "I found everything we need," he said firmly. He explained how Kwame had bribed an official to replace Abony's name with his own and used fake tax documents to make it look legal. "He left a trail, Abony. Greedy people always do." Abony nodded, her face calm. There were no tears this time, only quiet determination. "Then we'll use that trail to bring him down," she said softly. Together they began preparing a case, gathering sworn statements, making copies, and planning the next step. Every signature, every receipt, every witness mattered. As she sealed the final envelope of evidence, Abony looked out at the darkening sky. The farmhouse was gone, but her father's spirit wasn't. "You thought you buried me, Kwame," she whispered, "but you only planted my strength." This time, Abony wasn't waiting for justice. She was going to fight for it and win. Abony spent the whole night planning her next move. She looked at herself in the mirror and whispered, "No anger, no tears, just calm." The next morning she dressed simply, a white blouse and a long skirt, the kind her mother used to wear. She carried no folder, no papers, only a small purse. Today, she wasn't coming as the broken sister. She was coming as the woman who had already gathered everything she needed. When she arrived at Kwame's new house, it took her a moment to take it all in. The gates were high, painted gold, and a shiny black SUV sat in the driveway. The house was big, loud, and flashy, nothing like the quiet family home they grew up in. She took a deep breath and rang the bell. Kwame opened the door, surprised but grinning. "Ah, my little sister finally came to her senses," he said, stepping aside. Come in, come in. I was just about to pour a drink." Inside, everything smelled like new money: leather couches, imported rugs, glass tables. Abony looked around quietly while Kwame poured himself a drink. "You've done well for yourself," she said softly. He laughed, raising his glass. "Of course I have. I told you business is about being smart. Look around. I've already bought a new villa in Accra. And next week I'm getting another car. You see, you could have had this too if you'd just listened to me." Abony smiled faintly. "You're right," she said, her voice steady. "You always were good at getting what you want." Kwame leaned back, proud and careless. "Exactly. That's why you should forgive me, eh? Families shouldn't fight over small misunderstandings." Abony tilted her head. "Small misunderstandings. You forged my signature and sold our father's land." Kwame chuckled. "You signed, remember? Don't blame me for your mistakes. He sipped his drink, unaware that the clock behind him was ticking down the last moments of his freedom. Then, from the hallway, the front door opened again. Footsteps echoed, slow, firm, and confident. Mr. Tomba appeared, followed by 2 uniformed police officers. Kwame's hand froze midair, the glass clinking against the table. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice suddenly sharp. Mr. Tomba's expression was calm. "Mr. Kwame Mensah, you are under investigation for fraud, document forgery, and illegal sale of inherited property. We have all the evidence." Kwame's face went pale. "This is nonsense. You can't." Ebony interrupted softly, her voice stronger than ever. "You thought I was weak, Kwame. You thought I'd cry and walk away. But Papa taught me better." The officers stepped forward. Kwame tried to argue, but his words tumbled into silence as they read him his rights. Ebony stood still, watching quietly. The man who once laughed at her pain now looked terrified, cornered, powerless. And for the first time, Ebony didn't feel small. He felt free. The air inside the small courtroom was heavy with tension. Reporters whispered, neighbors filled the benches, and Ebony sat quietly beside Mr. Tomba, her hands folded in her lap. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair neatly tied back. On the other side sat Kwame, his once confident face now pale and restless. He tapped his foot nervously, avoiding her eyes. When the judge entered, the room went silent. Mr. Tomba stood, his calm voice steady as he began. "Your Honor, we have gathered clear evidence proving that Mr. Kwame Mensah forged his sister's signature and illegally sold their late father's property." He placed a folder on the table and opened it slowly. "These," he said, lifting the first document, "are the original land papers, signed by both siblings after their father's passing." Then he held up another sheet. "And this," he continued, "is the forged version. Notice the date alteration and the digital signature placement." The difference was undeniable. Even from a distance, it was clear someone had tampered with it. Kwame shifted in his seat, sweat forming on his forehead. "That's a mistake," he muttered. "Someone else did that, not me." But Mr. Tomba wasn't done. He turned to the witnesses. 2 workers from the demolition site. They stood nervously, but spoke the truth. "We saw Mr. Kwame collecting payment from the developer himself," one said. "He told us his sister agreed to it, but she never came there." Murmurs spread across the courtroom. Ebony stayed still, her eyes on the floor, her heart pounding softly but steadily. She didn't need to speak, the truth was doing it for her. Then came the final piece of evidence. Mr. Tomba held up a small recorder. "Your Honor, this is a voice note from the defendant's phone, provided by one of his close friends." He pressed play. Kwame's voice filled the room, confident, proud, and cruel. "She'll never know. The land's mine now. I handled her just like I planned." The sound echoed through the courtroom like a hammer. Gasps erupted. Kwame's face drained of color. He jumped up from his chair. "That's not me. That's edited," he shouted, but his voice cracked under the weight of his own guilt. Ebony finally lifted her head and looked straight at him. Her eyes were calm, no anger left, just deep, quiet disappointment. She spoke softly, but her words cut through the silence like glass. "You stole from our father's grave, Kwame. The land wasn't just soil. It was his life, his dream, and you sold it for greed." Kwame opened his mouth, but no words came out. The judge called for order as the officers stepped closer to him. Ebony took a deep breath and closed her eyes. For the first time since her father's death, she felt peace. The truth had finally spoken, and it spoke louder than any lie Kwame had ever told. The evening sun dipped low over Kumasi, painting the sky in shades of gold and red as police officers arrived at Kwame's grand new house. The gates that once symbolized pride and power now swung open to reveal shame. 2 officers stepped out, calm but firm, holding the official warrant in their hands. Inside, Kwame was pacing, his phone glued to his ear, desperately calling people who no longer wanted to answer. When the officers entered, his voice rose sharply. "You can't arrest me. I'm a respected businessman," he shouted, his face red with anger and panic. but the lead officer simply replied, "Mr. Kwame Mensah, you are under arrest for forgery, fraud, and illegal property sale. You have the right to remain silent." His hands shook as they turned him around and placed the cold handcuffs on his wrists. The metallic click echoed through the big living room, a sound that made everyone freeze. For a moment, the man who had once bragged about power and success looked small, cornered, and helpless. Outside, the noise drew attention. Neighbors began to gather by the gate, whispering in disbelief. "Is that Kwame, the man who bought that SUV last month?" one murmured. "They say he cheated his own sister," another whispered, shaking her head. The same people who once admired him now looked at him with pity and disgust. As the officers led Kwame down the steps, his eyes darted around, searching for Abeni. She stood a few feet away, dressed simply, her face calm but heavy with emotion. Their eyes met for a brief, painful moment. He tried to speak. "Abeni, please. Tell them it's a mistake. You can stop this." She swallowed hard. "You stopped it the day you forged my name," she said softly. Her voice didn't tremble this time. It was steady, filled with quiet strength. The crowd parted as the officers guided Kwame to the waiting car. Cameras flashed, whispers grew louder, and the mighty image he'd built for himself began to crumble right there on the street. The engine started, and in seconds he was gone, the successful brother now just another man facing the consequences of his greed. Abeni stood still, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She didn't smile, she didn't celebrate. Instead, she let out a deep breath she'd been holding for months. Tears filled her eyes, not of sadness, but of release, the kind that come when truth finally wins. Mr. Tomba stepped beside her, his voice gentle. "It's over, Abeni. Justice has spoken." She nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the police car disappeared. "No," she whispered. "It's just beginning. Now I can rebuild, not just the land but everything he tried to destroy." And as the sun sank completely, the wind carried the faintest scent of cocoa and soil, the spirit of her father's dream, finally at peace. After many long months of court hearings, paperwork, and sleepless nights, Abeni finally received the call she had been waiting for. The judge's ruling was in her favor. The land that her father had poured his life into was legally hers again. When she heard the words, "Full ownership restored to Miss Abeni Kusi," tears filled her eyes. It wasn't just about property. It was about justice, dignity, and her father's memory finally being protected. The first time she walked back onto that land, she stood silently for a long time, letting the wind touch her face and the scent of the earth fill her lungs. The mango trees her father had planted still stood tall, their roots deep and unshaken, just like her. She knelt, ran her fingers through the soil and whispered, "We're home again, Papa." Instead of selling the land or hiding it away, Abeni decided to build something that mattered. She rebuilt the old farmhouse with her own savings and the help of local workers who respected her courage. The cracks in the walls were filled, the roof was repaired, and the garden bloomed again. But this time, the land had a new purpose. She transformed it into a training center for women who wanted to learn farming, business, and independence. Women who, like her, had been underestimated or silenced. Every morning, laughter and hope echoed across the fields as women worked side by side, learning how to plant, harvest, and sell their crops. Abeni often shared her story with them, not to gain sympathy, but to remind them that no one could take away what was meant for them. Reporters began visiting the center, calling her the woman who turned betrayal into empowerment. But Abeni didn't care for fame. Her joy came from seeing women earn their own money, stand tall, and believe in themselves again. Sometimes, when the sun set and the golden light washed over the fields, she thought of Kwame. She didn't feel anger anymore, just peace. His greed had taken him down a dark road, but it had also pushed her to find her own strength. The same soil Kwame tried to steal had become the foundation of her victory, a living symbol of her resilience. Her father's dream had not died, it had simply waited for her to bring it back to life. After many long months of court hearings, paperwork, and sleepless nights, Abeni finally received the call she had been waiting for. The judge's ruling was in her favor. The land that her father had poured his life into was legally hers again. When she heard the words, Full ownership restored to Miss Abney Cussy. Tears filled her eyes. It wasn't just about property. It was about justice, dignity, and her father's memory finally being protected. The first time she walked back onto that land, she stood silently for a long time, letting the wind touch her face and the scent of the earth fill her lungs. The mango trees her father had planted still stood tall, their roots deep and unshaken, just like her. She knelt, ran her fingers through the soil and whispered, "We're home again, Papa." Instead of selling the land or hiding it away, Abney decided to build something that mattered. She rebuilt the old farmhouse with her own savings and the help of local workers who respected her courage. The cracks in the walls were filled, the roof was repaired, and the garden bloomed again. But this time, the land had a new purpose. She transformed it into a training center for women who wanted to learn farming, business, and independence. Women who, like her, had been underestimated or silenced. Every morning, laughter and hope echoed across the fields as women worked side by side, learning how to plant, harvest, and sell their crops. Abney often shared her story with them, not to gain sympathy, but to remind them that no one could take away what was meant for them. Reporters began visiting the center, calling her the woman who turned betrayal into empowerment. But Abney didn't care for fame. Her joy came from seeing women earn their own money, stand tall, and believe in themselves again. Sometimes, when the sun set and the golden light washed over the fields, she thought of Kwame. She didn't feel anger anymore, just peace. His greed had taken him down a dark road, but it had also pushed her to find her own strength. The same soil Kwame tried to steal had become the foundation of her victory, a living symbol of her resilience. Her father's dream had not died, it had simply waited for her to bring it back to life.